There will be no secret here this evening. You know perfectly well who I am. You have come to see Oscar Wilde in the wicked lesson. If I appear to you to be less than the Prince of Darkness, have no misgivings. For I promise not to lead you astray into the paths of virtue. But the Prince of Darkness, what else would you have me be? Dirty, drunken, debauched? This rather large figure of notoriety. Go ahead, look at me. You may stare. I am yours for the evening as such. A towering scandal. I must inform you, however, that scandals are related only to the hatred of the people who invent them, not those attacked. Thoughts for the evening, my dear public, as we proceed. Now, I must admit that it is rather disturbing to discover that one's published works are no longer identified by one's name. The importance of being earnest, an ideal husband, the picture of Dorian Gray, all these now bear the title author of Lady Windermere's Fan. It's true, even Lady Windermere's Fan by the author of Lady Windermere's Fan. Well, so much for fame, or should I say, infamy. Tell me frankly, do I appear to you to be a little overdressed? Well, I atone for that by being immensely overeducated. And as for secrecy, I have come to like it. Indeed, even the commonest things can become delightful if one only hides them. We have here a double deception. This glass of water was actually meant to be a glass of absinthe, thus deceiving you. It is, however, a glass of water, thus deceiving me. Oui, l'absinthe. Vous avez promis une verre de l'absinthe. Où est-elle? Prenez une verre de l'absinthe immédiatement, s'il vous plaît. Why, only yesterday in the street I heard a fellow say, there goes that bloody fool, Oscar Wilde. Isn't it extraordinary how soon one gets to be known? Oh, but I do adore your city. There were suggestions, well meant I'm sure, that after my prison sentence I would do well to retire to Venice. Venice, with its dead waterways and its silence, no. I have had enough of silence, thank you. I wish to look at life again, not to become a monument to be looked at by tourists, and so the decision was not a difficult one. Oh, excuse me, I thought I recognized you. See, I was told that some of my former friends might be here this evening. It's possible. Well, God knows what they could want of me now. Contrition? Hardly. Denunciation? What a bore. No, in point of fact, I am simply going to offer you my observations. And indeed, how fortunate you are in that respect. This is not the first time, you see, that I have been paid for a public appearance such as this. No. Many years ago, I had the dubious pleasure of a lecture tour in those peculiar states so-called United in America. Does that surprise you? Well, it certainly surprised me at the time. I wasn't prepared for it. New York to California, cross-country. Mind you, I was extremely young, but quite brilliant even then. To this day, I vividly recall the first American I ever met, a customs agent. He wanted to know what I had to declare. Well, quite naturally, I told him I had nothing to declare except my genius. I wonder if any of you realize how incredibly tedious an American city can be. New York, too busy, too big. Boston, a paradise of prigs. Chicago, all bustle and bores. And as for the city of Indianapolis, oh my God. I made the innocent mistake of calling the farmers their peasants. And I was crucified. I soon discovered that Americans have no lower classes. On the other hand, they have no ruins either. Instead, they have what they call wonders. The Niagara, for instance. It seems that every American bride is taken to the Niagara, and the sight of that stupendous waterfall must be the second greatest disappointment in America. Oh dear. I have the uncomfortable feeling that we have at least two Americans here this evening. Forgive me, madam, forgive me, sir. If I am mistaken, I apologize. But really, you ought not to appear in public dress so untamed. Yes, that reminds me of a small hamlet in the American West called Leadville. Now, Leadville is known as the richest city in the world. All of its citizens are miners, well, that is to say they work in the mines, and they all carry guns. I was told if I went there, they would be sure to shoot me and my traveling manager. I said nothing they could do to my traveling manager would intimidate me. As it turned out, they adored my lecture on the ethics of art, especially those passages from Benvenuto Cellini. Indeed, I was reproved for not having brought him with me. But when I explained that he had been dead for some little time, they asked who shot him. Now, there was one genuine patron of the arts in Leadville. At the time, he was suing the railway company for damages because the plaster cast of the Venus de Milo, which he had imported from Paris, had been delivered without arms. He won his case. Dear. Now, I must admit in my own humble way that my American tour was a huge success, especially in the South. You see, I am attracted to Southerners. Although they do have a melancholy tendency to date every event of importance to the late Civil War. I once remarked to a Southern gentleman, how beautiful is the moon tonight. Yes, was his reply, but you should have seen it before the war. Americans, if only at least they had a sense of humor. But they are abnormally serious creatures. I think perhaps because America has never quite forgiven Europe for having been discovered first. Oh, there are people I know who claim that America was never discovered at all. It's possible. I myself would say now that it was probably detected. But before we dismiss the Americans, and one is apt to do that quite readily, I should like to compliment the American woman. They are, on the whole, quite irresistible. I think probably because they behave as if they were beautiful. Sweeping recklessly through society in a pretty whirlwind of petticoats, lips that are made for laughter. They can talk brilliantly on any subject, provided they know nothing about it. While their thoughts flutter about with the sweet irresponsibility of butterflies. Oh, they are marvelous. Oh, if you would please indulge me for just one moment. Thank you. Absurd. It shimmers in the southern twilight. It has about it the seduction of strange sins. It can transport you to barbaric lands where unicorns mate with hedgehogs. You have the feeling that I sometimes drift towards exaggeration. Well, you are quite right, I do exaggerate. Let's be frank, I often lie. But not in the sense, say, that a politician lies. No, politicians are never true liars. They never rise above the level of misrepresentation. They actually condescend to prove a point, to discuss, to argue. How unlike the temperament of the true liar, with his frank, fearless statements, his superb irresponsibility, his natural, healthy disdain of proof of any kind. It seems to me If a man is so unimaginative that he must produce evidence in support of a lie, he might just as well speak the truth. People have this careless habit, of talking about a born liar, as they might talk about a born poet. Well, they are wrong in both cases. Lying and poetry, as Plato saw, require careful study and devotion. It is just that lying lately has fallen into disrepute. Many a young man with a natural gift for exaggeration might grow, if nurtured, into something really great and wonderful. But as a rule, he falls into careless habits of accuracy and comes to nothing. What is even worse, it seems to me, is to speak sincerely. That always leaves one so apt to be misunderstood. Consider. If one puts forward an idea to a true Englishman, always a rash thing to do, he never dreams of judging whether the idea is right or wrong. The Englishman thinks only of its sincerity, the principle of the thing. Well, persons are better than principles in any case, and persons with no principles are better than anything else in the world. God bless the English. Do you know, an Englishman's idea of vigorous health is galloping on a horse after a box, the unspeakable in full pursuit of the uneatable. You will notice, however, that English ladies are of two kinds, the plain and the painted. Now, the plain are mostly Puritans. Well, I don't mind that. It's their only excuse for being plain. And God knows they can be useful. If one wishes to gain a reputation for respectability, one has only to take a plain woman out to supper. The painted, on the other hand, can be quite charming, provided they believe they look at least 10 years younger than their daughters. That's why they paint. Have you noticed 20 years of romance makes a woman look like a ruin? 20 years of marriage makes her look like a public building. Romance. At one time, I wore nothing but violets for a whole season as a form of artistic mourning for a romance that would not die. Ultimately, it did die. I forget what killed it. I think it was her proposal to sacrifice the whole world for me. Oh, that is always a dreadful moment. It fills one with the horror of eternity. I met her a year later at a dinner party, in fact, and she assured me that indeed I had spoiled her life. I noticed, however, that she ate an enormous dinner, so I felt no anxiety. Oh, what a complete lack of taste, though. Oh, dear. If I offend you ladies, be not vexed. I offend everyone indiscriminately. And you do give us the gold of your lives, even though invariably you want it back in small change. You know, I think for the most part, the people who have adored me have always insisted on living on long after I've ceased to care for them or they to care for me. They grow stout and tedious, and when we meet, they go in at once for reminiscences with towering memories. Oh, it's a fearful thing. The worst of having any kind of romance is that it leaves one so unromantic, with one exception, to love oneself. Yes, there is the beginning of a lifelong romance. With your kind permission, I should like to read you a poem. Well, that is to say, it is a poem committed to memory. And the reason it is committed to memory is due to the fact that I wrote it. Yes, I have all of my poems committed to memory, with the exception of La Bella Donna della Mia Mente, which is uncommittable. I have chosen The Harlot's House, a title I trust will not disappoint you. The Harlot's House. You know, I don't know whether you like poetry or not. Actually, there are only two reasons to dislike poetry. The one reason is to dislike it, the other is to like it rationally. You see, reason is not the faculty to which poetry appeals. The Harlot's House. It's always seemed amazing to me that poetry flourished in England. Perhaps that's because the public never reads it. And now, if memory serves, the harlot's house. We caught the tread of dancing feet. We loitered down the moonlit street and stopped beneath the harlot's house. Inside, above the din and fray, we heard the loud musicians play the Troilus Divas heads of Strauss. Like strange mechanical grotesques making fantastic arabesques, the shadows raced across the blind. We watched the ghostly dancers spin, the sound of horn and violin like black leaves wheeling in the wind. Like wire-pulled automatons, slim silhouetted skeletons went sidling through the slow quadrille, then took each other by the hand and danced a stately saraband. Their laughter echoed thin and shrill. Sometimes a clockwork puppet pressed a phantom lover to her breast. Sometimes they seemed to try and sing. Sometimes a horrible marionette came out and smoked its cigarette upon the steps like a live thing. Then turning to my love, I said, the dead are dancing with the dead. The dust is whirling with the dust. But she heard the violin and left my side and entered in. Love passed into the house of lust. Then suddenly the tune went false. The dancers wearied of the waltz. The shadows ceased to wheel and whirl. Down the long and silent street, the dawn with silver sandaled feet crept like a frightened girl. You know there isn't a single real poet of this century on whom the British have not solemnly conferred diplomas of immortality. We have many people today who write verses, but there isn't a line of poetry in them. Well, actually, in England there are only two kinds of writers, the unread and the unreadable. The only two poets who have influenced me were Keats and Shelley. But by the time I came across them, I had already gone more than halfway to meet them. Quite frankly, one longs for the old days when books were written by men of letters and read by the public. Today, books are written by the public and read by no one. Of course, we do have our popular writers in prose. Shaw, Meredith Hardy, George Moore, Rudyard Kipling. Yes, I believe Mr. Kipling's Captain's Courageous is quite popular now. But I will never understand why any author should write an entire book about cod fishing. Well, perhaps that's because I never eat cod. Now, George Bernard Shaw is quite apart. A man of real ability with a bleak mind. He believes in nothing. He loves nothing, not even Bernard Shaw. And for that I do not wonder at his indifference. He is a man who hasn't an enemy in the world and none of his friends like him. However, I admire Mr. Shaw. England is a land of intellectual fog, and Mr. Shaw has done much to clear the air. I think Thomas Hardy was all right until he discovered that women have legs underneath their dresses. That discovery has almost wrecked his life. Passion to him is a childish illness like measles. George Moore. Did I mention George Moore? I can think of no other author who leads his readers to the latrine and then locks them in. Well, perhaps I am being a little harsh. All of our English writers do provide relaxation for the intellectually unemployed. Now, may I pose the question, what is art? Art is simply beauty. And there is nothing sane, about beauty. No, it is far too splendid to be sane. And that is why all art is useless. One can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. And so stands the artist, like an angel before life with its drawn two-edged sword. His view of life is paramount to everything, and should be applied to everything, above all to religion and morality. Vice and virtue are simply his materials. He knows, for instance, that there is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are either well written or badly written, and that is all. And the books the world calls immoral are those books that simply show the world its own shame. Well, wickedness in any case is just a myth, invented, I think, by good people to account for the curious attractiveness of others. As far as I'm concerned, good manners are far more important than good morals. And any preoccupation with the ideas of what is right and wrong in human conduct shows arrested intellectual development. One has only to look at war. As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have its fascination. But once it is thought of as vulgar, it will cease to be popular. Oh, I am sorry. We were talking about the artist, weren't we? I seem to have drifted off onto the subject of morality. Well, it stirs me, you see, I can't help myself. Do you know, today, a man who cannot talk morality to a large immoral audience is quite finished as a politician. There is nothing left for him except perhaps the church or botany. Let me tell you precisely what morality is. Morality is simply the attitude we adopt towards those people we personally dislike. I do not think we were sent into this world to air our own moral prejudices. I never take any notice of what common people say, and I never interfere with what charming people do. It is the good people who do harm in this world, and the greatest harm they do is to make badness of such extraordinary importance. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I cannot abide a man who hasn't a single redeeming vice. Now, this may come as no surprise to you, but I have had works of mine criticized. No, attacked is the word, and on the basis of morality. I speak, of course, of the picture of Dorian Gray. Words and phrases such as ugly, vulgar, coarse, a malodorous putrefaction. Rather sweet, that one. Crude will take every young mind that comes in contact with it, grubbing in muck heaps. They said the book was unmanly, vicious, sickening, and tedious. Tedious? How dare they? Never. Do you know it has even been suggested that the government should exercise censorship over such imaginative literature? Would the government put Shakespeare on trial for Richard III? Well, some governments might. Good people exasperate one's reason. Bad people stir one's imagination. Well, no matter. Praise makes me humble. But when I am abused, I know that I have touched the stars. Forgive me. I was injured, you see, in prison, and I haven't been able to. I bore you with that. The arts, God's last creation. The artist stands alone. Well, almost. The critic is always present. Oh, now the critic does have his function. We know that. I certainly does, but I can't think of it at the moment. Perhaps the only valid excuse for the critic's existence is that the artist is incapable of criticizing his fellow artist. I sometimes think only bad artists admire each other's work. They call it being broad-minded, free of prejudice. But the truly great artist cannot conceive of life under any circumstances save those he has selected for himself. That reminds me of the opening night of An Ideal Husband. That's one of my modern drawing room comedies with pink lampshades. At the curtain of my second huge theatrical success, I was forced to rise and declare my regrets that Mr. Wilde was not in the house. Thus we have the critics. They ought to be pensioned off, I think. Oh, I am told, however, that all drama critics can be bought. Well, judging from their appearance, they can't be very expensive. Oh, but I do love acting, you know. I do love acting, and I do love absinthe. Yes. Acting is so much more real than life, isn't it? I do think, however, that the theatre might be far better off if it were peopled with moving puppets rather than actors. Yet puppets would have a remarkable advantage. They never argue. We are never bothered by accounts of their virtues, and when they are out of an engagement, they never do good in public places or save people from drowning. Oh, no, puppets are admirably docile with no personality whatsoever. So unlike the actor. In any case, you know, I never write plays for actors. I write them simply to amuse myself. Later, if people want to act in them, I sometimes allow them to do so. And this, unfortunately, requires the services of a theatre manager, and thus we sink lower and lower. I recall a production of mine in preparation in New York City. The theatre manager there actually requested that I make certain changes in the manuscript. I wrote back at once and said, who am I to tamper with a masterpiece? You suppose there might just happen to be another glass of absinthe out there somewhere? No. Well, life is full of little disappointments, but we survive. In this life, there are only two great disappointments. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. I am not going to read you another poem. Not at the moment. I am going to recite what I call a poem in prose. It is a story, it is a parable, it is what you make it, and if you wish, you may purchase it on your way out this evening, along with my collected works. You know, all of my writings were published by the firm of Osgood and Company, who constantly made the point that their books appeared simultaneously in New York and London. Herbert Beerbohm-Tree told me the other day that poor Mr. Osgood had died. I couldn't help asking if they had buried him simultaneously. And now, my poem in prose. Honorius the Hermit was a very good man who lived alone in a cave. Well, perhaps it's necessary to live alone in a cave in order to be a very good man. Now, the daughter of the king came to seek him out. She had heard that he was very pleasant to look upon, that he had forsworn the world, but she could not believe that he could remain true to his vows once he had beheld her, for no man had ever been able to resist her. So the king's daughter left the great city and went forth into the desert to seek the holy man. Being directed to his cave by some peasants, she stood outside and called him by name. When he came forth, she told him that she was the daughter of a great king, and that she would make him a prince if he would come with her to Alexandria. But he regarded her not, and made answer that there was only one king who had died upon the cross, and there was only one love, the love of God. And he spoke with scorn of the body, and of human passions, and of earthly beauty, and of the things of this world. But as he was speaking, his voice grew tender, and he had compassion on her, and he told her that she must unburden her soul, which was heavy with sin, and live henceforth as the servant of him who had died for her. Well, then the king's daughter told Honorius the Hermit of her life in the great city, of the kings and the princes who had been her lovers, of the slaves who had done her bidding, and the men who had died for her, of the magnificence of her palace and her apparel and her jewels, but that now, having listened to Honorius the Hermit, she had decided to abandon her life of lust and luxury and to dedicate herself to God. As she was speaking, Honorius the Hermit began to long for the joys that had not been his. And to perceive that without experience of the pleasures one sacrifices, there is no sacrifice. And he lusted after the body of the king's daughter. And he said, I will come with you to Alexandria, and together we shall taste the 7 sin stations like that. For I know that my life has been evil, and I will not go with you to Alexandria, but that I shall go alone. Farewell, and nothing would persuade him. And so the king's daughter, who had come to tempt the holy man, and by him had been converted, remained in the desert, while the holy man, who had forsworn the world until the king's daughter revealed its delights, journeyed to Alexandria. I regret to say she died of starvation. He, I fear, died of debauchery. I think any form of self-sacrifice should be put down by law. But it's so demoralizing on the people for whom one sacrifices oneself. They always go to the bad. Let us forget the martyrs and send forth only missionaries. Yes, missionaries are the divinely provided food for destitute and underfed camels. And beware the reformer. After all my personal difficulties, I do not wish to reform anything in this world. Nor would I change anything in this world, even in England, except perhaps the weather. I do hope that none here this evening think that I attempt to slander the church. Good heaven. I can think of nothing better for the culture of a country than the presence in it of a body of men whose duty it is to believe in the supernatural. Yes. However, you know, as far as I'm concerned, joining the church would not suit my constitution. Certainly no priest would listen to my confession in a becoming frame of mind. I do, however, sincerely desire to receive extreme unction in my final hours, and I am no longer in fit condition to shock anyone. Many years ago, I visited the Vatican on several occasions. Yes. I received the papal blessing 7 times until the novelty faded. I met a priest there who gave me a summary of his religious beliefs. And he was so evidently, so unmistakably sincere, and above all, so truthful, I couldn't believe a word he said. And now, ladies and gentlemen, my second parable. It isn't a parable at all. It is a simple and very brief story on the value of presence of mind. It is a real-life incident related to me by a well-known actor who's still happily amongst us, who owes his very existence to a daring exhibition of coolness in the face of terrible danger. Now, this actor had the chief role in a drama that had proven very popular in the West End of London for months. There had been an empty seat in the house. Then one evening, at that tense moment in the play, when the poor flower girl rejects with scorn the odious proposals of the wicked marquis, great clouds of smoke poured in from the wings, and the scenery was caught with great tongues of flame. Well, although the safety curtain was lowered immediately, the audience were terrified and raced towards the exits. A hideous panic ensued, men pushing and shoving, women screaming and clutching. Well, at the height of the din, the actor whom I have mentioned came in through the orchestra door, took in the situation at a glance, scrambled up on the stage, stood erect with flashing eyes and arms upheld before the iron curtain, and in a voice that sounded like a trumpet throughout the theatre commanded, "Silence!" Well, the audience knew this voice well and felt reassured. The panic subsided. He told them that there was no longer any danger from the fire, that it was now completely under control, but that there was very real danger from their own fear, and that their very lives depended on keeping their heads and returning to their seats at once. Well, feeling thoroughly ashamed of themselves, they did as they were bidden, and when the exits were cleared and the seats were occupied once more, the actor leapt lightly over the footlights into the stalls and vanished through the first convenient doorway. Then the auditorium filled with smoke, and flames rushed in from every side, and not another soul left the place alive. And there you have it, the value of presence of mind. You may well ask, what is the moral? Perhaps the moral is that it is always a silly thing to accept advice, and to accept good advice is absolutely fake. Beware, be careful, be on guard. But on the other hand, one must never be too careful. One must always be ready for a new sensation. I'm afraid, however, for me, there is no such thing. You may have noticed this little habit of mine of arranging things. Well, you see, in prison, in my cell, everything had to be kept in its exact place. If I neglected this even for an instant, I was punished. And the punishment was so horrible that I often started up in the night to feel whether everything were exactly where the regulations required, and neither an inch to the left or to the right. And the terror, quite frankly, haunts me still, so that involuntarily my fingers make order. Oh, this is quite intolerable. Only one glass of that, sir. Really? Oh, I am sorry. I don't know what came over me. I do believe one's temper, like Mr. Whistler's painting, should never be displayed in public. Actually, you know, I have very few complaints. For the most part, I hold wondrous treasure of a rich, rewarding life. One of the moments I treasure most happened when I was a schoolboy. It is a moment that had a profound effect upon me. I was young and eager, and the life of books had begun to appeal to me more than real life, novels and poetry. Knowledge came to me through pleasure, as it should. 9 out of 10 of my school chums thought of only football and cricket and rowing. Healthy young barbarians. We chose our friends, if not wisely, by instinct. And my last year at Portora, there was a boy 2 years younger than I, and we were great friends. We had long walks together and long talks together, and I talked interminably about what I should have done had I been Alexander, and how I would have played king in Athens had I been Alcibiades. My friend had a wonderful gift for listening, but I was so occupied with talking and telling him about myself that I knew very little about him. Curiously little, now that I come to think of it. And then the last incident of my school life made me think that he was sort of a mute poet, and that there was much more to him than I had imagined. It was just after I had won an exhibition and was on my way to Trinity College. I hurried to tell my friend the wonderful news, but to my surprise he seemed cold and a little bitter. "You seem glad to go," he said. "Oh, but of course," I replied. "Just imagine going off to Trinity College, Dublin. I'm wild with delight. It's the first step to Oxford and to fame." Still in the same cold way, he said, "I mean leaving here, leaving us, leaving me." "Oh, of course not, you silly fellow," I replied. "I shall always be glad to be with you, and who knows, perhaps you'll be coming to Trinity College too one day." "No," he said, "no, I'm afraid not. But I will come to Dublin." "Well, then you must come to see me." He looked at me with sad, regretful eyes, but the future was beckoning to me, and I couldn't help talking about it. The golden key to Wonderland was in my hand, and I was wild with hopes and desires. So that morning, as I was about to leave for the railway station, having said goodbye to everybody, my friend came up to me and said, "I'm coming with you to the station, Oscar." Oh yes, the headmaster gave me permission when I told him what great friends we'd been. "Oh, I am glad," I said, "that my last hours at school will always be associated with you." He just looked at me, and we left for the station. When I was settled in my train, he didn't go and say goodbye and leave me to my dreams, but brought me papers and things and hung about. "You will write to me, Oscar, won't you, and tell me everything?" "Oh, yes, of course I will. Once I get settled down. But there will be so much to do at first, and I'm so anxious to see everything. I wonder how the professors will treat me." I rambled merrily on when suddenly the whistle sounded, and after a moment the train began to move. "You must go," I said. "Yes," he replied in a strange, muffled voice. was standing with his hand on the door of the cabin. And then suddenly he turned to me and cried, "Oh, Oscar." And before I knew what he was doing, he had caught my face in his hands and kissed me on the lips. The next second he had slipped out of the door and was gone. I sat there all shaken, and then I became aware of the cold drops trickling down my face. His. They affected me very strangely. As I wiped them away, I said to myself in amazement, "This is love. This is what he meant, love." And I trembled, and I sat there for the longest time, all shaken with wonder and remorse. Ladies and gentlemen, I would be less than candid with you if I did not confess that I simply must have another glass of absinthe. So, if you will be kind enough to excuse me, please. If there is any demonstration in front of the hall, just ignore it, for they know not what they do.